ascend in the lateral white column to the brain. It's going to go to the thalamus, and then it's going to go to your parietal lobe where you feel. Okay? However, if the spinal cord is sectioned above L2, erection can still occur. You won't process it if you're the guy, you won't feel it, but you can still have a visceral reflex. All right, and that's because there can be interneuron connections down to the motor neuron component, okay, or over to this side. They crisscross on both sides. So if we're talking about emission, it's going to go to the autonomic nervous system, right? Remember the lateral gray horn? Okay. So with the autonomic nervous system, we have two neurons in the peripheral nervous system. One has its cell body in the spinal cord, and that's known as the pre-ganglionic neuron, okay? So that neuron, if it's sympathetic, and I'm going to move over to this side because I have more room, so let me repeat this. We have our sensory neuron coming in. And then a connector neuron coming down here. All right, so our preganglionic neuron is going to be in the cell body. And it's motor, right? Sympathetic is motor, so it's going to come out the ventral root. Now, I haven't drawn it here, although I've drawn it over there because I wanted to go through these components first. So now we have the sympathetic chain ganglia. Remember those? So that's what we have drawn here. Too many pens in my hand here. So these are going to go all the way up the neck and all the way down into the pelvic cavity. And we have our rami communicantes. So, remember I said that sympathetic goes out to your skin? It does your sweat glands. It does the blood vessels in your skin. It does the blood vessels to your skeletal muscles. So if you're really scared, you want the blood to be diverted from your digestive tract to your skeletal muscles. All right? So those neurons, those sympathetic neurons are going to come along the ventral ramus, come into the sympathetic ganglia, and synapse with the postganglionic neuron. Overlapping diagrams here. And it's the postganglionic sympathetic neuron because the parasympathetic have pre and post as well. So the ganglia is a ganglia because it's made up of the cell bodies of the postganglionic neurons. Okay? So there's the cell body of the postganglionic neuron. And it's going to go into the ventral ramus and go out to the skin, the sweat glands, skeletal muscle of the body. Parasympathetic doesn't do that. Okay? Well, the penis is considered an organ, and so is the gland, so we're not concerned about that. All right? We want to get it to the organs. And so we have then other neurons that are going to come along here. And they're going to come into the white rami communicantes, and they're not going to stop. They're going to keep on coming either to the abdominal organs or to the pelvic organs. And so anybody know what these nerves are called that contain the preganglionic nerves of the sympathetic nervous system, or any parasympathetic for that matter? So our word for body that you may remember is somatic. We're going to see that at the end of this unit when we talk about the embryo development. Most often, you've probably heard the word for organ is viscera, or visceral, like the visceral peritoneum or the visceral pleura. Another word for organ is splanchnic. So these preganglionic neurons that are going to the organs are known as the splanchnic nerve. If they come off of the lumbar region, they're called lumbar splanchnic. We won't talk about the ones yet in the thoracic. If they come off of the sympathetic region, they're called sacral. Those are the ones we're going to be paying attention to. Okay, our sacral. Actually, I don't want to confuse you here. I'll put both. Because these are coming off of lumbar since we have the lateral great horn. Okay? So that's how we get sympathetic nerves from our spinal cord to our vas deferens, or to our prostate gland, or to the bulbourethral glands or seminal vesicle glands. Okay? Now, that's what we would see up here. Okay? Splanchnics would be coming off of here. This one coming from here, notice there's no horn. All right? So I'll redo it, but I'll draw it here just for, so this one coming down. It's going to come in here. It's postganglionic neuron going out to the skin. It's going to do that, so that's what I drew on the board. Okay? If, however, it's coming down to the organs and the glands, it's going to come down through here without stopping and go into our sacral splanchnic because it's associated with the sacral spinal cord. Okay? So this is a sacral splanchnic nerve. Notice that that only has one ramus communicantes. Do we have sweat glands in our lower extremities? Yep. Do we have blood vessels? Are skeletal muscles there? So that one also needs to have sympathetic neurons going out to the body. We have no sympathetic neurons in the sacral spinal cord. So this is going to come down here. And that's going to go out to the skin and skeletal muscle. So notice we don't have a white ramus communicantes because we have no preganglionic neuron at that level. The white ramus communicantes is for the preganglionic neuron to come into the ganglia. All we have is a gray ramus communicantes for the postganglionic neuron to go out the ventral ramus. Okay? So that's why we only have one ramus communicantes there. So we have no sympathetic neurons on this side. Okay? So that's the sympathetic aspect. Okay? Now, let's look at the parasympathetic. Notice I drove up there spinal cord, thoracic and lumbar region. So if you want to take a picture, go ahead because I'm going to erase certain parts. And we're going to change it to the second level on the diagram on the left and make this sacral. Okay? So a sympathetic is thoracolumbar region. In other words, we only see the lateral gray horn in the thoracic level and the lumbar level. What do we call parasympathetic? Where do we have parasympathetic preganglionic neurons having their origin? We have the, where? No, those are sympathetic types of sympathetic ganglia that you're thinking of. What are the cranial nerves that carry parasympathetic? For this unit, we're only interested in cranial nerve 10. Vagus. Okay, for the semester. So that's the cranial part. The 4 parasympathetic nerves that are cranial nerves, ocular, motor, facial, and so on. We're only interested in vagus this semester. All right, well, a little bit of musculofacial. The other end is all the way at the sacral spinal cord. So the peripheral nervous system associated with cranial sacral nerves. So our lateral gray horns are only in the thoracolumbar because they're sympathetic. Okay. Parasympathetic is from the brainstem and from the sacral region of the spinal cord. They are separated that far apart. I have no idea why. It doesn't make any efficiency sense. So when we change this to sympathetic, we need to change this to craniosacral. And we're looking at the sacral region, okay? Sympathetic was lumbar region. So this is gonna be like L1 and 2, and this is gonna be S2 and 3 levels, okay? So, first thing we need to do, if we're looking at the sacral region of the spinal cord, is take off our lateral gray horn. That's only sympathetic, okay? So no lateral gray horn. So this is going to be involved with erection. So we have sensory coming in as well, okay? And this time we're at the sacral region. So our parasympathetic fibers are not going to use the sympathetic chain at all. They're going to come down. We're not even going to have this one. Oh, that's the only one right now. So we're not going to have this part at the sacral level. So any sympathetic effect is going to come down the chain, okay? And go out the sacral splanchnic nerve. But now we have sensory coming in from the penis, and it's going to be stimulating erection, not emission. And so it's going to be closer to the anterior gray horn, which is parasympathetic. Preganglionic. Its neuron is going to come out the ventral ramus, okay, and doesn't travel too far, and then it's going to leave. But it's still going to be parasympathetic. And it's still going to be preganglionic. So what did we call preganglionic autonomic nerves? Going to organs. Parasympathetic always goes to the organs. Splanchnic. So both of these are splanchnic nerves. Okay? This one is splanchnic for parasympathetic. This one is splanchnic for sympathetic. And how do we keep them apart? This one is known as pelvic splanchnic. This one is known as sacral splanchnic. And they're impossible to keep, remember which is which. Except for this cool little trick I have. PS. What starts with PS? Parasympathetic or sympathetic? Para. So pelvic splanchnics are parasympathetic. Okay? Sympathetic only starts with S. So sacral splanchnics are sympathetic. Okay? The pelvic splanchnic comes off the ventral ramus. The sacral splanchnic comes off the sympathetic chain. All right, so now let's look at what we have over here. That's, if you need to go back and look at the autonomic nervous system chapter, or Netter's diagrams. We're going to look at Netter's diagrams in just a moment. So the first thing to occur in our 3 E's is erection. Okay, erection, then emission, typically, and then ejaculation. So we're going to be using our sensory innervation coming from the penis. And these are online if you need to practice. All right, so coming from the penis, what's the name of the nerve from the penis? During sensory innervation? Down on the,
Dorsal?
no, down on the, yeah, dorsal becomes pudendal. Okay, but we start out with the
Dorsal.
sensory nerve coming from the glans penis and shaft of the penis. And it's known as the dorsal nerve of the penis. We're going to use this for each of those 3 E's. It's going to be our sensory trigger for the reflex of emission, for our erection, emission, and ejaculation. So it comes from the top of the dorsal surface of the penis, and it's going to go and become joined with all the other branches of sensory to form the pudendal nerve. Okay? So the dorsal nerve is a subunit or branch of the pudendal nerve. And these are labeled on the online diagrams. So it's going to come up, come through the ventral ramus. It's going to come into the spinal cord via the dorsal root ganglion. And it's going to come in here to the posterior great horn, just like I drew over on the larger diagram. All right? Now, if as a guy, you're feeling this, okay, that's because the other neuron's going to go up to the brain. It doesn't have to. We can have our reflex. So we can sever here at L1, and the guy can still have an erection, okay? Even though he may not be able to feel his hand or somebody else's hand on his penis, or if he's having intercourse. The sensory stimuli can still be there, all right? Now, they may not be interested in hearing that 24 hours after they break their neck in a diving or a motorcycle accident, but later on, the spouse or whatever it may be, they can still have kids, depending on where the level of that transaction is, okay? All right, so we're going to be using the reflex part of this right here, and we're doing sympathetic, okay? We're looking at emission, I keep saying wrong. We're looking at ejaculation.
Erection.
And ejaculation is governed by parasympathetic neurons. So that means that our parasympathetic neuron, our preganglionic neuron, has to come out of the sacral spinal cord because it's not found in the lumbar. So coming out of the motor part, the ventral root, this would be the preganglionic parasympathetic neuron. Goes into the ventral ramus for just a short distance. And then it's going to exit via what splanchnic nerve? Pelvis. Good. Now, normally, parasympathetic goes into the wall of the organ, okay, into the bladder. In this case, it doesn't. It stops within the pelvis. So that's the end of the preganglionic. And then the postganglionic neurons, so there's a ganglion right here, are then going to travel to the blood vessels, primarily of the corpora cavernosa. All right, so this ganglion is going to travel into these blood vessels and release neurotransmitter. So these are parasympathetic pre, parasympathetic post. Okay. So I'm going to let you finish that, and then I'll show it to you the way it looks on the diagram. It looks very complicated up there with all those other structures, but we're essentially talking about 3 neurons. One sensory neuron coming in, and a pathway of 2 sequential consecutive motor neurons going out. Okay?
So just to confirm,
Yeah?
erection and ejaculation is parasympathetic and then emission is sympathetic.
Yeah, ejaculation is all 3, voluntary and sympathetic and parasympathetic. So we're going to do parasympathetic, then we're going to do sympathetic, then all 3 come together for ejaculation. Okay, we do have, I forgot to write it on here, those, let me do it. We don't normally have a name for these postganglionic neurons here, but these are known as cavernous nerves because they're going to the corpora cavern, okay? Corpora cavernous. So these are cavernous nerves. The postganglionic parasympathetic. Right here.
You were
Cavernous
parasympathetic.
Okay.
And then.
So I'll show that to you on the diagram, right? So this is online as a separate file listed under this lecture. So here's the structures. We'll look at the neurotransmitter effects in just a moment. But to tie it in with what I drew, and shoot, that was supposed to be purple. Oh well. Sensory neuron, forming the dorsal nerve of the penis, carrying sensory information from that skin surface into the pudendal nerve, traveling along the ventral ramus to have its cell body in the dorsal root ganglion, ending in the posterior gray horn. Okay? Second neuron will carry that information to the brain, so the guy can feel it. But a reflex activates the parasympathetic preganglionic neuron, which is what forms our pelvic splanchnic nerves. That goes into the pelvis. You had me before, what we call the rat's nest, and forms the cavernous nerves going to the blood vessels of the corpora cavernosa and the corpus spongiosum. Okay? So now before we look at the neurotransmitters, I want to show that to you on some anatomical slides. This one I don't like so much, so you can ignore what's over here on the left. But here are the ventral rami coming from the sacral spinal cord. Remember, each level has the ventral ramus. They form the sciatic nerve, which is going to go out the greater sciatic notch, all the way down the back of the leg is the nerves of the lower extremity. But coming off of the sacral plexus is the pudendal nerve, which is going to come back into the inner aspect of the pelvis by passing through, here's the ischial spine. Ischial spine separates greater sciatic notch from lesser sciatic notch. There's a ligament that actually closes those off. So this nerve goes over and comes back inside and travels on the inside of the ischium and pubic bones. And then gives rise to the different nerves that go to those areas. So here's our sensory nerve, all right? Coming in, joining these other perineal nerves and forming the pudendal nerve, which then goes back into the sacral ventral rami. So here's a diagram of what's happening from the posterior view. All right, here's the sciatic nerve cut. Here's a pudendal nerve coming over the ischial spine, and then going back in and traveling between the obturator internus and the levator ani. So that's the nerve that you can see on that male pelvis model that I showed you, traveling along the inner aspect, and it's going to divide into the perineal nerves and the dorsal nerve of the penis. So here again, dorsal nerve of the penis to pudendal nerve going into the sacrum. Okay? So now, this is from Netter's, all right, in the pelvis. It's oriented by regions. It looks completely chaotic. It's a little clearer in the female, but let me show you what you're looking at. Penis, male, all right? Sagittal view. Here's the sacrum, so traveling in and out of the, traveling in and out of the spinal cord. These are the ventral rami. So notice this nerve coming off the ventral ramus. That is a preganglionic parasympathetic nerve. So as soon as you see this coming off the ventral ramus of sacral spinal nerves, those are pelvic splanchnic nerves. And they're coming into the rat's nest. Why I call it a rat's nest. Okay? It's all mixture of sympathetic and parasympathetic. Then right down here, it's going to synapse with the postganglionic parasympathetic and form the cavernous nerves. Okay? Also, coming from the penis, if we follow it, here's our dorsal nerve of the penis, forming part of the pudendal nerve and going back to the spinal cord. Okay? So you don't have to know everything on there. Here's a So here's the dorsal nerve of the penis in green. becoming part of the pudendal nerve and going into the ventral ramus, just like we drew it on the diagram. All right? Here's, coming out of the ventral ramus is a pelvic splenic nerve, coming into the pelvis, forming a ganglion, and then going into the blood vessels of the penis, and this would be the cavernous nerves. So it looks totally, where do I start when you look at everything? But if you kind of follow it through, you can see those components. Okay? All right. After all that, the physiology is a little bit easier, I think anyway, although the diagrams. So if you wondered how Viagra works, okay, before you even look at this, what does calcium do for a skeletal or smooth muscle? Does it cause relaxation or does it result in contraction? It results in contraction because it allows the troponin to move aside and the tropomyosin to move and expose a binding site. Okay? So the neurotransmitters allow the smooth muscle of those blood vessels to relax by two different ways. One is to remove the calcium. So if calcium's gone, then the binding sites aren't there. And the other is to inactivate, so when muscle contracts, here's the myosin head, and it swings forward and binds to the actin site, right? What has to attach before it releases? Anybody remember? ATP. So then it releases, and what does the myosin head do to that ATP? It splits it, releases energy. It's a myosin ATPase, just like our subunits were GTPases, okay? So what this does is it inactivates that enzyme that splits ATP. So if the enzyme can't be split, the head's not going to recock and we stop muscle contraction. So we have relaxation two different ways. All right? So this is a cyclic GMP activity. The guanylate cyclase is going to convert GTP to cyclic GMP, and that affects the calcium. So cyclic GMP is going to cause calcium to go back into the storage sacs. With less calcium, the muscles actin and myosin can't find each other. Okay? The second method is the protein kinases, all right, are going to add a phosphate group and to the enzyme, and that inactivates the myosin. Remember protein kinases? Another are activated by cyclic GMP. So cyclic GMP lowers calcium, and cyclic GMP activates protein kinases, and that results in the inactivity of the enzyme that makes energy from ATP. So both of those result in the smooth muscle of the blood vessels relaxing, which allows them to dilate as more blood flows into them. Okay? So there are two neurotransmitters involved. What's the typical neurotransmitter of parasympathetic? Acetylcholine, because it's a cholinergic activity. All right? So acetylcholine is going to work on blood cells lining the blood vessels, and they're going to release nitric oxide. So those cavernous nerves will also make nitric oxide. So we have two different neurotransmitters, both acetylcholine and the gas, nitric oxide. It's one of the questions on the report. And then that activates guanylyl cyclase, which makes cyclic GMP. We move calcium back into the endoplasmic reticulum. We inactivate the myosin proteins. They can't break down ATP. That muscle cell relaxes. Okay? So the effect of Viagra is that second one. It activates phosphodiesterase. Phosphodiesterase, okay, it inactivates phosphodiesterase. So there's going to be more cyclic GMP. Remember, phosphodiesterase inactivated cyclic AMP and inactivated, so Viagra inactivates phosphodiesterase, so the cyclic GMP that is made can stay there. And then you just have prolonged and increased dilation of blood vessels. So that's as complicated as we get physiology. We don't go to the physiology of erection and ejaculation. We'll just talk about the neural pathways. All right? So, erection. Okay? Now, when we look at, that's just the same thing. When we look at emission, that's sympathetic. So I'm going to, since it's on the diagram now, I'm going to go through the diagram. We're going to stop when we get to ejaculation, okay? And then we'll do that. I know you've been sitting here for a while. So, same sensory. What's the nerve that carries sensory input? Dorsal nerve of the penis. That goes through the pudendal nerve to get to the posterior gray horn. Now we need to do sympathetic, which is up in the lumbar region. So that has to synapse and go up to the lumbar region. Sympathetic neurons then come down the sympathetic chain. And the preganglionic neurons go through the sacral splanchnic, okay, to get to that same plexus, and then I'll draw on the board where they go. So the first part of that's going to be the same. The second part's going to be different because it's sympathetic. By the way, in case you were wondering, I learned a long, long time ago not to have students draw things for me. Because then I spend half my time trying to interpret the drawing. Okay? So if I have you trace this out, I'll have the other stuff already there, or I'll just have you, in other words, you'll draw the neurons in there, or I'll have everything there and you just label it for me.
Okay.
Okay? So you don't have to draw this whole thing. Otherwise, I'm grading artwork instead of knowledge.
Yeah, the old Lydia.
Okay, so now we're looking at sympathetic. I should have drawn that in purple because that's what it matches up on your board. So now, sensory stimuli via dorsal nerve of the penis, through the pudendal nerve, and this is now going to connect with up there, and the one coming in here is going to connect with the one up there. And our preganglionic neuron is in the lateral gray horn. Now I've left some of the splanchnics out just for clarity, so we're not gonna, this is gonna come in here. It's not gonna synapse. It's gonna come down into the sacral, and it's gonna come out the sacral spinal cord, off the chain, all right? Then it's gonna come into the pelvis rat's nest and stop. And the postganglionic neuron, we don't have any